There was a moment in April 1963 when CIA budget officers realized their funding was about to be slashed by 20%. That moment came when President John F. Kennedy's budget director, Kermit Gordon, delivered a message from the Oval Office. The CIA's budget would be cut drastically, effective in the 1964 fiscal year. The order wasn't negotiable. It wasn't a request for efficiency improvements. It was a deliberate attempt to cripple the agency financially, to reduce its operational capabilities, to force the CIA to operate within constraints that would make autonomous covert operations impossible. Kennedy had concluded that the only way to control the CIA was to starve it of resources. Take away its money, and you take away its power. The CIA had operated with essentially unlimited secret funding since its creation in 1947. Its budget was hidden inside Pentagon appropriations, disguised as weapons systems and military equipment purchases. Congress didn't know how much the agency spent. The public had no idea. Even presidents received only general estimates, not detailed accounting. The CIA controlled its own purse strings, spending billions on operations worldwide without meaningful oversight or accountability. Allen Dulles, CIA director from 1953 to 1961, had built an empire funded by invisible money. Kennedy was trying to make that money visible and then cut it by 20%. If you want to understand how Kennedy's plan to slash CIA funding made him a mortal enemy of the intelligence establishment, and why that plan may have cost him his life, hit that like button. This is the story of the budget cut they never forgave, the financial war Kennedy couldn't win, and the president who tried to bankrupt the agency that wanted him dead. Let's start with why the CIA's budget was untouchable, because understanding that requires understanding how the agency had hidden its funding for over a decade. When Congress created the CIA through the National Security Act of 1947, the legislation included a remarkable provision. The CIA didn't have to disclose its budget publicly. Section 403(d)(3) stated that the CIA could transfer and receive from other government agencies such sums as may be approved by the Office of Management and Budget for the performance of any of the functions or activities authorized. In other words, the CIA could take money from other agencies' budgets and spend it however it wanted. This created a system where CIA funding was completely opaque. The agency's budget was scattered across dozens of other government accounts. Money appropriated for Air Force research might actually fund CIA operations in Laos. Navy construction funds might pay for CIA stations in Africa. Army personnel budgets might cover CIA officers' salaries. Nobody outside the agency knew the true cost. By 1963, the CIA's annual budget was estimated at $550 million, equivalent to over $5 billion today. But that was just the baseline. Additional funding for major operations came through emergency transfers that didn't appear in any public accounting. The Bay of Pigs invasion alone cost over $45 million that Congress never explicitly approved. This financial opacity gave the CIA enormous power. Without budget transparency, there was no accountability. The agency could launch operations without justifying costs. It could hire thousands of contractors and agents without congressional approval. It could build facilities, purchase weapons, and conduct wars that officially didn't exist. Money was power, and the CIA had unlimited access to both. But after the Bay of Pigs disaster in April 1961, Kennedy began questioning whether the CIA deserved that unlimited access. The operation had failed catastrophically, but it had also revealed how much money the agency was burning through on operations Kennedy hadn't properly authorized. Kennedy was furious, not just at the operational failure, but at the financial recklessness. The CIA had treated taxpayer money like a personal slush fund, spending whatever it wanted on whatever operations it chose. And when those operations failed, nobody was held accountable because nobody outside the agency even knew how much had been wasted. In June 1961, Kennedy issued National Security Action Memorandum 55, 56, and 57, attempting to transfer control of paramilitary operations from the CIA to the Pentagon. But Kennedy quickly realized that structural reorganization wasn't enough. As long as the CIA controlled its own budget, it would find ways to continue autonomous operations regardless of presidential directives. So Kennedy decided to attack the CIA's financial foundation. In late 1961, Kennedy instructed Budget Director David Bell to conduct a comprehensive review of intelligence spending. Kennedy wanted to know exactly how much the CIA was spending, where that money was going, and if it could be reduced significantly.
Bell's review revealed shocking waste. The CIA was paying for operations that had ended years earlier but remained on the books. The agency employed thousands of contractors doing duplicative work. It maintained expensive facilities that served no current mission. And it was spending enormous sums on covert operations that Bell's analysts couldn't even identify because they were classified at levels above presidential review. Kennedy saw an opportunity. If he could force the CIA to justify every dollar, to account for every operation, to submit to genuine budget oversight, he could limit the agency's capacity for autonomous action. And if the agency resisted that oversight, Kennedy would simply cut the budget unilaterally. In April 1963, Kennedy made his move. According to multiple sources, including statements later attributed to former CIA officials, Kennedy ordered a 20% reduction in the CIA's budget to be implemented in the 1964 fiscal year, beginning October 1, 1963. 20%. Not a token reduction, not a symbolic gesture, a massive cut that would force the agency to eliminate operations, fire personnel, and close stations worldwide. The CIA would have to choose which missions were actually vital to national security and which were merely convenient for maintaining institutional power. Think about what a 20% budget cut meant. CIA stations in dozens of countries would close. Covert operations in Vietnam, Laos, Cuba, the Congo, and elsewhere would be scaled back or eliminated. Thousands of contract agents would be terminated. Intelligence collection would be reduced. The agency's capacity to conduct the kind of autonomous operations that had characterized its first 15 years would be crippled. For CIA officers who had built careers on unlimited funding and minimal oversight, Kennedy's budget cut was an existential threat, not just to specific operations, but to the agency's entire institutional identity. The CIA had defined itself as America's global covert action force. Without the money to conduct those operations, what was the point of the agency? The reaction inside CIA headquarters was immediate and hostile. Richard Helms, deputy director for plans who ran covert operations, told associates that Kennedy's budget cut would destroy American intelligence capabilities. James Angleton, chief of counterintelligence, argued that reducing CIA funding would hand the Soviets a strategic advantage. Station chiefs worldwide reported that their operations would become impossible with reduced budgets. But Kennedy was unmoved. He'd concluded that most CIA operations weren't actually advancing American interests. They were advancing CIA institutional interests, creating justifications for bigger budgets, more personnel, expanded power. Kennedy believed the agency could accomplish its genuine intelligence mission with far less money if it focused on actual threats instead of empire building. The CIA's allies in Congress rushed to defend the agency. Members of the Armed Services and Appropriations Committees who received classified CIA briefings argued that cutting intelligence funding during the Cold War was reckless. Senator Richard Russell, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, told Kennedy directly that the budget cut was a mistake. But Kennedy had support, too. Senate Majority Leader Mike Mansfield supported intelligence budget reduction. So did Kermit Gordon. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara agreed that the CIA was overfunded and that its missions could be accomplished more efficiently. Kennedy had enough political support to force the cut through. Or so he thought. The problem was implementation.
Kennedy could order the budget cut, but the CIA had to actually implement it, and the agency simply refused to comply in any meaningful way. When Gordon's Budget Bureau staff demanded detailed accounting of CIA expenditures to determine where cuts could be made, the CIA claimed those details were classified and couldn't be shared with budget analysts. When Gordon insisted on access, the CIA produced sanitized summaries that revealed almost nothing about actual operations or costs. The agency also threatened consequences. CIA officials warned that cutting the budget would eliminate intelligence collection on Soviet missile programs. They claimed covert operations preventing communist expansion in the Third World would end. They suggested that closing stations would leave America blind to threats. All of this was exaggeration or outright lies, but it created political pressure against the cuts. By summer 1963, Kennedy's budget cut was stuck in bureaucratic warfare. The CIA was resisting implementation through every means available: classification restrictions, threat inflation, congressional lobbying, and simple stonewalling. Kennedy's fiscal year 1964 budget, scheduled to take effect October 1, 1963, included the 20% CIA reduction, but whether the agency would actually spend less money remained unclear. Kennedy knew he was in a fight. At a private dinner in July 1963, Kennedy reportedly told journalist Ben Bradley that he was considering more drastic action, eliminating the CIA entirely after his 1964 re-election and creating new intelligence agencies with clear budget limits and congressional oversight from the start. That statement, if accurate, reveals how frustrated Kennedy had become. Structural reforms hadn't worked, personnel changes hadn't worked, budget cuts were being sabotaged. Kennedy was contemplating burning down the CIA and starting over. But Kennedy never got the chance to implement his budget cut or his more radical plans. On November 22, 1963, 52 days after the fiscal year 1964 budget took effect, Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. Lyndon Johnson became president, and one of Lyndon Johnson's first decisions regarding intelligence policy was reversing Kennedy's CIA budget cut.
Within weeks of taking office, Johnson restored full funding to the CIA. The 20% reduction was eliminated. Johnson cited the need for robust intelligence during the Cold War, the importance of covert operations, and the agency's vital role in national security. The financial pressure Kennedy had applied to force CIA accountability disappeared completely. Not only did Johnson restore funding, he expanded it. As the Vietnam War escalated under Johnson, CIA budgets grew dramatically. Covert operations in Laos, Cambodia, and South Vietnam consumed billions. The Phoenix program, the secret war in Laos, psychological operations, all funded at levels far exceeding what Kennedy had authorized. Richard Helms, who had opposed Kennedy's budget cuts, became CIA director in 1966 under Johnson. Helms presided over the largest expansion of CIA operations and funding in the agency's history. The vision of a smaller, more accountable CIA that Kennedy had pursued died completely. Was Kennedy assassinated because of his plan to cut CIA funding? There's no document stating "kill Kennedy because he's reducing our budget," but the pattern is undeniable. Kennedy ordered a 20% CIA budget cut in April 1963. The cut was scheduled to take effect October 1, 1963. The CIA resisted implementation through summer and fall 1963. Kennedy was assassinated November 22, 1963. And Johnson reversed the budget cut within weeks, then dramatically increased CIA funding. The people who benefited from Kennedy's death were the same people threatened by his budget cuts: CIA officers whose operations would have been eliminated, defense contractors who profited from CIA weapons purchases, congressional allies who received campaign contributions from intelligence-linked businesses, anti-communist ideologues who believed unlimited CIA funding was essential for fighting the Cold War.
Let's be explicit about the financial stakes. A 20% cut to a $550 million budget meant $110 million per year in reduced spending, over $1 billion today. That wasn't just an accounting adjustment. That was the difference between conducting operations and shutting them down, between maintaining global presence and retreating, between institutional power and irrelevance. For CIA officers whose careers depended on those operations, Kennedy's budget cut was a direct threat to their livelihoods. For contractors who supplied the agency, it meant lost profits. For the entire ecosystem that had grown around unlimited CIA spending, Kennedy's financial assault threatened their existence. Multiple witnesses have suggested CIA involvement in Kennedy's assassination, often citing financial motives. E. Howard Hunt's deathbed confession mentioned that anti-Castro Cubans were motivated partly by the loss of CIA funding for their operations after Kennedy refused to invade Cuba. David Morales, who ran CIA operations in Miami, reportedly told associates that Kennedy had to go because he was destroying the agency. These weren't abstract complaints about policy differences. They were specific grievances about money, about budgets, about the resources needed to conduct operations. Kennedy's budget cut made those grievances acute. After Kennedy's death, not only did the CIA survive, it flourished financially. Budgets expanded throughout the 1960s. New operations launched worldwide. The agency hired thousands of additional officers and contractors. The financial empire Kennedy tried to dismantle grew larger than ever. The budget cut Kennedy ordered in April 1963 remained on paper until his November 1963 assassination, then vanished. It became a historical footnote, evidence of a president who tried and failed to control intelligence spending. But it demonstrates something critical. Kennedy understood that the CIA's power derived from its money, and that limiting that money was essential to establishing democratic control. On April 1963, Kennedy ordered a 20% CIA budget cut. For 7 months, the agency fought implementation. On November 22, 1963, Kennedy was dead, and the financial independence Kennedy tried to end survived intact. If this story made you question the official narrative about Kennedy's relationship to the CIA, do something powerful. Hit that like button. Every like tells YouTube this financial history deserves wider attention. Subscribe for more investigations into the budget battles presidents lost to intelligence agencies. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment. Should CIA budgets be public? Should Congress know how intelligence money is spent? Are you in the US, Europe, Middle East, Asia? Share your thoughts because some stories are buried in budget documents, not just classified files. Thank you for watching, and remember, history doesn't repeat, but it echoes. The budget cut was real. Kennedy ordered it in April 1963. The CIA resisted it through November 1963. Kennedy died, and the cut died with him. They called it fiscal responsibility. Kennedy called it the way to control an out-of-control agency. The CIA called it an existential threat, and when the president who threatened their budget was killed, funding was restored within weeks. April 1963, budget cut ordered. October 1963, cut takes effect. November 1963, Kennedy dead. December 1963, funding restored. The timeline speaks for itself. Follow the money, that's what investigators always say. The money trail in Kennedy's assassination leads straight to the CIA's budget, the budget Kennedy was slashing, the budget the agency was defending, the budget that was restored the moment Kennedy was gone. The order JFK gave that should have ended CIA independence forever, instead ended JFK, and the agency kept its money, its power, and its autonomy for decades to come.